There is a moment every single night when you become the single most defenseless creature on the planet. Not when you're driving, not when you're walking home late, right now, tonight, when you close your eyes. Your muscles go slack, your hearing dulls, your awareness of the room, the house, the world outside your window drops to almost nothing. For roughly 8 hours, you are a warm, motionless, completely unguarded body lying flat in the dark. And here's the part that should bother you. For nearly all of human history, doing that alone, behind a closed door, with no one else nearby, would have gotten you killed. So the real question isn't why our ancestors slept in groups, it's why we ever convinced ourselves that sleeping totally alone was the normal thing to do. Think about your own bedroom for a second. Locked door, walls, maybe an alarm system, a phone on the nightstand. All of that exists because, on some level, we still know sleep is a vulnerable state. We just outsourced the protection to steel and electronics instead of people. But for over 95% of the time humans have existed, none of that technology existed. No locks, no lights, no walls thick enough to matter. So what did ancient humans use instead of a deadbolt? The answer is almost embarrassingly simple, and once you hear it, you'll never look at solo sleeping the same way again. They used each other. Start with the most obvious threat: predators. Big cats, hyenas, pack hunters. Almost all of them are built to be more dangerous after dark, precisely when human eyesight is at its weakest and human reaction time slows to a crawl. Now picture a lone sleeper in that world, unaware, motionless, no one to hear the grass move. That's not just risky, that's close to the worst possible setup a predator could ask for. A group changes the math instantly. More bodies means more ears, more eyes, even half-asleep ones, and a dramatically higher chance that something dangerous gets noticed before it's close enough to matter. Here's where it gets genuinely clever, and most people have never thought about this. Sleep isn't one flat, uniform state. It moves through cycles, lighter stages, deeper stages, and back again, and no two people fall asleep at exactly the same moment, or move through those stages in sync. That means in any group of sleepers, someone is almost always sitting in a lighter, more easily woken stage at any given time. Without anyone planning it, without anyone pulling guard duty on purpose, the group ends up with a rolling, overlapping window of partial alertness running through the entire night. It's an accidental security system, built entirely out of ordinary human biology. This isn't just theory. Researchers studying groups like the Hadza in Tanzania and the San in southern Africa have actually watched it happen. Within a shared sleeping space, certain people wake up periodically through the night, tending a fire, sitting up briefly, scanning the dark, then drifting straight back to sleep. Nobody assigned that. There's no chart, no rotation schedule pinned to a tree. It emerges naturally from enough people sleeping close together, and the effect is nearly identical to a deliberate night watch, minus the actual planning. Evolution appears to have built a security system directly into the architecture of sleep itself.
Now, add fire into this picture, because it doesn't just provide light, it completes the whole system. A shared fire needs occasional tending through the night, fuel added, embers checked, coals kept from dying in the coldest hours. That small task naturally created more of exactly the light, rotating wakefulness we just talked about. Whoever sat up to feed the fire was, in the same motion, scanning the darkness beyond the light. Fire and the sleeping group weren't two separate survival tools, they were one integrated system. Warmth and light radiating outward, bodies providing shared heat and overlapping vigilance radiating inward. Predators get all the attention, but cold was just as dangerous and far more constant. Body temperature naturally drops during sleep, that's normal biology, but in a cold environment, without something to counteract it, that drop becomes a genuine survival threat on its own. Sleeping in close contact with other bodies solves this passively, all night, with zero ongoing effort. No fuel to gather, no fire to feed, just proximity. For ancient humans in cold climates, sleeping alone wasn't only a security gamble, it was a thermoregulation gamble too. And group sleeping quietly solved both problems at once, using the exact same behavior. Here's something that might explain a very specific, very modern frustration. You wake up around 3 a.m., wide awake for no obvious reason, and immediately assume something is wrong with you. It isn't. Historical records from multiple pre-industrial societies describe something researchers call segmented sleep. A first sleep, a stretch of quiet wakefulness in the middle of the night, and then a second sleep before morning. That was the original human default, not the unbroken 8-hour block we now treat as the only acceptable version of a good night's rest. Your 3 a.m. eyes open moment isn't a malfunction, it's an inherited pattern from a design that expected you to not be alone. In a communal sleeping space, that middle-of-the-night waking period had a purpose. People talked quietly, checked on each other, did a soft, low-stakes version of socializing in the dark before drifting back off. Strip away the group, and the exact same biological pattern turns into something else entirely. Isolation, silence, a racing mind with nowhere to put itself. That's a genuinely uncomfortable thought. A huge slice of what we now medicate and label as insomnia might not be a sleep problem at all. It might be a loneliness problem, wearing a sleep problem's clothes. This isn't just a nice theory, it's been tested. Sleep researcher Jerome Siegel led a major study comparing several present-day hunter-gatherer and pre-industrial communities to typical modern populations. The surprising result, these groups didn't sleep dramatically more than we do. That popular assumption turned out to be wrong. What they did have was remarkable consistency, tightly tied to natural light and temperature, and notably low rates of reported insomnia, all without a single sleep app, white noise machine, or melatonin tablet. The real gap between ancient and modern sleep was never about duration, it was about consistency and context.
So if it was never about how long you sleep, what actually made the difference? Consistency and context, a body clock locked to real daylight, a sleeping environment that felt genuinely safe, a social structure that meant you were never fully alone during the most vulnerable hours of your day. We've replaced almost all of that with technology aimed at fixing symptoms, blackout curtains, sound machines, supplements, while the actual variable our biology evolved around, other people nearby, quietly disappeared from the equation. You can buy every sleep gadget on the market and still be missing the one thing that mattered most. Now bring children into this. Co-sleeping with infants shows up across an enormous range of traditional societies, and it's not just tradition for tradition's sake. Infants regulate body temperature poorly, need frequent nighttime feeding, and are far more vulnerable than adults. Sleeping close by let a caregiver respond almost instantly without ever needing to fully wake up. Some researchers even point to possible physiological reasons tied to nighttime breathing regulation in very young infants, an area still actively being studied. Meanwhile, the modern default of placing a newborn in a separate room from day one is one of the most radical departures from historical human practice that exists. It's brand new, and we genuinely don't have generations of data on it yet. Let's push back on this for a second, because group sleeping wasn't some flawless, cost-free arrangement. Snoring, movement, reduced personal space, real disturbances that almost certainly annoyed people night after night for thousands of years. This wasn't a perfect system, it was a trade-off. But evolution doesn't optimize for comfort, it optimizes for survival, and the security, warmth, and rotating vigilance benefits clearly outweighed the annoyance of a few extra elbows and a lot of snoring, or this pattern would never have shown up independently, over and over, across so many unrelated human societies around the world. There's a psychological layer here too, and it might be the most relevant one to your life right now. Perceived safety directly affects how well you actually sleep. Hypervigilance, that background sense that you need to stay alert, measurably interferes with deep restorative rest. An ancient human sleeping completely alone in a genuinely dangerous environment had every rational reason to sleep worse, simply because being alone and unconscious really was dangerous. Sleeping in a group let the brain partially stand down that threat monitoring system, not because the danger vanished, but because it was now shared across multiple people. The individual brain could finally go deeper because it wasn't carrying the entire watch alone. Here's a detail that puts this whole pattern in a much bigger context. We are far from the only species that does this. Numerous primate species, monkeys, apes, our closest evolutionary relatives, show strong, consistent preferences for group sleeping, often in elevated, defensible spots, clustered tightly rather than spread out. When multiple unrelated primate species facing similar risks independently land on the same basic strategy, that's a strong signal you're not looking at a human cultural quirk. You're looking at something ancient, deeply conserved, and baked into primate biology long before humans ever existed as a distinct species.
Now here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Several times every night, your brain cycles into REM sleep, the stage tied to your most vivid story-like dreams, and something remarkable happens to your body. A cluster of neurons deep in your brainstem actively blocks the signals that would otherwise let you move, dropping you into what scientists call atonia, a near-total shutdown of voluntary muscle control. You are fully unconscious, dreaming, and functionally paralyzed, all at the exact same moment. This happens roughly every 90 minutes, again and again, all night long, every single night. It's the single most physically vulnerable window in your entire day, more vulnerable than walking home alone after dark, more vulnerable than swimming out in open water. Some researchers even link this directly to sleep paralysis, that unsettling experience of briefly waking while the paralysis hasn't fully lifted yet. It's reported across nearly every culture on Earth, often described the exact same way: pressure on the chest, a sense of presence in the room. If the most defenseless minutes of your entire night are the ones where your body physically cannot move, no matter what happens around you, then having other alert, mobile people nearby during exactly that recurring window wasn't comfort, it was math. Here's something most people never realize. Your brain doesn't fully switch off hearing while you sleep. Deep in the brain, a structure called the thalamus keeps gating incoming sound, deciding in real time what's worth waking up for and what safely gets ignored. Research into auditory processing shows the sleeping brain retains a surprising, almost selective ability to filter and prioritize certain sounds over others. A sleeping parent, for instance, often wakes far more easily to their own faint child's cry than to an equally loud, unrelated noise happening right next to them. A slammed door, a passing car barely registers. Inside a group, this selective filtering likely extended well beyond just parents and children. Group members probably developed heightened sensitivity to specific danger-associated sounds, a snapping twig, a low growl, an unfamiliar footstep, while simultaneously tuning out the routine, repetitive noise of shifting bodies and breathing around them. Even fully unconscious, with every muscle completely at rest, the sleeping brain was still quietly, continuously on duty, running its own private threat detection system in the background all night long. Beyond safety and beyond shared body heat, there's a social layer to all of this that's easy to overlook entirely. A shared sleeping space meant enormous repeated physical closeness, night after night, season after season, across an entire lifetime, from infancy until old age. That kind of sustained proximity likely triggered the same bonding chemistry we see in other close primates, reinforcing trust and group cohesion in a way that daytime interaction alone simply couldn't match. Choosing to sleep near someone, entering your single most vulnerable, defenseless state directly beside them over and over and over again, is one of the deepest, most consistent trust signals a person can give another human being. We now treat wanting that closeness as neediness, something almost embarrassing to admit. We treat total solo sleep, an entire room sealed off just for one person, as the mark of maturity and independence. Historically, though, it's almost the exact opposite of how humans actually operated for the overwhelming majority of our existence as a species.
Here's a strange piece of supporting evidence that on the surface has nothing to do with sleep at all: burial sites. Across multiple, completely unrelated ancient cultures, separated by oceans, thousands of years, and no contact with each other, archaeologists have repeatedly found individuals buried together in tight, deliberate physical clusters, sometimes curled into the same folded fetal-like postures that closely mirror typical communal sleeping arrangements. Burial practices obviously carry their own separate ritual and spiritual meaning, layered with symbolism we can't fully recover, but the sheer consistency of tight, clustered positioning, showing up independently in both sleep and death, again and again, across cultures that never influenced one another, suggests something deeper is going on underneath the ritual. It points to a psychological association between closeness, safety, and belonging that ran so deep in the human mind it shaped how ancient societies treated their dead, not just how they arranged their living. Even in death, the instinct for closeness never let go. Here's the part that should really make you sit up straight. Modern military units, wilderness survival instructors, and expedition guides, all built entirely on modern threat science with zero direct knowledge of ancient human behavior, arrived at almost the exact same conclusion our ancestors did, purely out of cold, practical necessity. Group sleeping arrangements with rotating watch duties, often called a watch rotation or sentry system, are standard recommended practice in hostile, remote, or unpredictable environments today, from combat zones to backcountry camps in bear country. Trained modern experts, equipped with satellite communication, night vision, and decades of current research, and carrying absolutely no cultural memory of ancient sleeping habits, independently reinvented the same basic strategy our distant ancestors stumbled into tens of thousands of years earlier, using nothing but trial, error, and survival. When two completely disconnected paths, separated by tens of thousands of years and zero shared information, arrive at the exact same answer, that's rarely just a coincidence. That's usually a strong sign you found something fundamentally, structurally correct about human vulnerability.
So here we are, private bedrooms behind closed doors, solo sleeping treated as the unquestioned default, even newborn infants placed in entirely separate rooms from the very first nights of their lives. All of this became possible only through a very recent, very specific combination of factors: larger housing with rooms to spare, dramatically lower predator and violence risk in daily life, artificial light and reliable locks that seal a room off completely, and a cultural shift, mostly over the last few centuries, that started prizing privacy over closeness. Meanwhile, some cultures around the world today still sleep communally as a matter of course, and researchers studying them report far lower rates of reported insomnia. Some researchers now genuinely wonder whether part of the modern insomnia epidemic, which affects a significant share of adults in industrialized countries, connects back to exactly this shift, pulling humans out of the socially monitored, collectively supported sleep environment our species spent almost the entirety of its existence adapted to. It remains an open question, not a settled fact, and more research is still needed, but it's one genuinely worth sitting with the next time you're staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m. Tonight, you'll probably do exactly what you always do, without giving it a second thought. Lock the door, turn off the lights, lie down completely alone in a small, sealed room built specifically to keep the entire outside world out. That sense of total, comfortable solitude while fully unconscious, safe enough to be alone, safe enough to be paralyzed by REM sleep with nobody watching over you, is a genuinely strange, genuinely recent luxury, one your ancestors never had access to for even a single night, and one that took roughly 10,000 years of housing, lighting, and security technology to make feel completely normal. For nearly the entire story of our species, the fires, the filtering ears, the rotating watch, the buried clusters, sleep was never something you were ever supposed to do entirely by yourself. It was something you survived together, one shared, watched over night at a time, for hundreds of thousands of years.
If any of this changed how you think about your own bedroom tonight, let me know in the points. Do you actually sleep better completely alone or with someone else nearby? And subscribe, because next time we're going even deeper into what your ancient, still vigilant brain is quietly doing while you think you're just resting.